Welcome back to the Nutrimedical Report. And we have open lines this hour. We will be scheduling back to come back on the program a number of special guests we mentioned in our last newsletter sent out last Sunday. Dr. Sam Millam will be coming back on. He has some emergency engagements and couldn't make it today, but we will be having him back on. We're also going to hear from Mr. Salas, Bill Salas, who actually has some very important new material, a new DVD and book about that's going to be talking about the current wars that are going on in the Middle East and his analysis based on biblical information. I think it's important to kind of look at the sober geopolitical analysis that lines up with the Bible to get a real clear idea where things are going. I want to start off with some of our nutraceutical solutions. Yesterday, using a little bit of tongue-in-cheek humor, I posted up a 2-minute, 39-second clip from Weird Al Yankovic called Foil. I hope people found it a little bit funny from both the 1-minute, 22-second mark where he, quote, found the code to a little hyperbole and a little tongue-in-cheek humor about the New World Order. I think people should realize that if you start asking questions, it's going to take you places you don't want to, and sometimes hyperbole and humor will kind of make you laugh a little bit when things get pretty serious. Let's also look today at some of our latest nutraceuticals. I have protocols, and it's open lines on any wellness question, geopolitical, spiritual, whatever issue. That number to call in, 800-259-5791. When you see me kind of get excited or need to make spiels like I did in the first hour with Dr. Bob Thiel, I called Dr. Bob at sort of the last minute because he wanted to come back on, and I mentioned that I'm going to have to make some statements over to kind of connect a lot of dots together in terms of what's going on with the current geopolitical situation and the biblical issues that not only Dr. Bob but other experts that we have in the program have put together that fits with common sense and the geopolitical analysis and the effects of what it's going to do on the economy, what it's going to do in terms of world politics, and of course the status of America in the world. And the current leadership in the U.S. government are doing everything to kind of reduce our status in the world, to reduce our ability of our dollar to be supported instead of being destroyed or being brought into opposition with the BRICS nations. And we need to talk about that. But I want to just kind of pull up some of the latest news items here so you get an idea just where things are going. We have, of course, the Rick Perry is always in the news. Illegal, so I'm just going to read off some of the things on the Drudge Report, which is a good place to start with. Gives you some open areas and then some other news report items that I pull up. Illegals protest outside the White House, no fear of arrest. Of course, that's kind of ridiculous. When you actually look at the latest statements, Cruz takes aim at Bonner border bill. So Mr. Cruz actually, Mr. Boehner, who says there's no chances of impeachment, he's not really involved. It's gone before the specific committee. So the impeachment issue, I think, is probably going to be held off until after the November election, but I think it will happen. And I think the fact is that there are some trial balloons being put by the Democratic Party forward to try to blow it off. But the real issue is 2016 is going to be a real battle. And if the Republicans don't blow it, they're going to put a Republican president in. I personally think Rand Paul would make a good president, although I think he needs to not kowtow to the needs or the wants of Israel in terms of military equipment. He needs to protect the state of Israel from partitioning, which I don't think should happen. I think that they should defang the extreme elements of Hamas. At the same time, the moderate Muslims and other Arabs and other people of the area should be able to vote in the territory. I think we should convert this idea that they're going to have an exclusively, quote, Jewish state, which has never really happened. And then we need to bring peace to the area, and in a sense, a Pax Americana, which is, going to be biblically based rather than based on the use of overuse or excessive use or contributing use of weapons. So, already now, of course, we mentioned earlier in the first hour that the Democrats and Republicans have come together to basically make a statement so that if Obama does not come to them for further use or expansion of the war in Iraq, he is, quote, immediately impeachable. And Mr. Krauthammer has already made that statement. The President is going to act broadly and generously on amnesty, and this is one of the spokespersons for the President, Mr. Guterres. I think that using executive orders in this way is going to get himself into a lot of trouble. The next statement, of course, is dealing with fear in Charlotte, Carolina. An Ebola man nearly reached the USA. It's only one plane ride away, and for someone to dismiss it like the World Health Organization is just irrational. Even a junior person in first year infectious disease would understand Ebola is spreading like wildfire across Africa with a long incubation period, a long time for the virus to spread. As I posted up articles, the CDC and FEMA are already getting ready with Ebola isolation centers. So they fear the largest outbreak of Ebola in history could go global. And that's one of the articles posted right up here on Drudge. I mean, I've been saying this for some time. We don't just have this. We've got multi-drug resistant tuberculosis, H7N9 in Shanghai, China, and elsewhere. We have the H5N1 still percolating away in Egypt and Middle East. They're killing people. We have the swine flu coming up from Mexico and Central America, new updated versions, genetic versions of the swine flu. We've got Plague Central, if you want to call it, and it's only an air flight away. They don't have any systems whatsoever to filter the air in the aircraft, so if somebody coughs in the back with multi-drug resistant TB or Ebola, you're going to be sprayed with virus within 2 minutes. And if it's an inoculum, which is a sufficient amount of organism to trigger off a primary infection, you're toast. You're going to get it. And 90% fatality rate. And I had to clarify yesterday, it wasn't Franklin Graham that got sick. It was one in his organization that got sick, one of the doctors in Samaritan's Purse that got quite ill. If they had been using proper reverse protection protocols, proper reverse protection equipment, ultraviolet, it was called ultraviolet curtains, which is an ultraviolet light to create a curtain of death, ozonators to generate ozone in the air around these patients, proper cleansing and changing of garments and documents and so on, we call the kind of barriers, face shields, etc. It's extremely unlikely this person would get sick. You have to be sloppy to get sick, to basically, and have lack of equipment or the means of sterilizing the equipment. So basically, if people are going there and they take a slack attitude toward it, you're going to get sick. And I saw this happening with doctors working in the ICU, where you have patients that would come in with infections. In fact, I remember actually treating a nurse. While I was working in the ICU, treating a nurse who actually was working with an ICU patient, had a very resistant form of chlamydia pneumoniae, and she got the chlamydia pneumoniae. She ended up in the intensive care unit for 10 months. So as much as you might think that these people that are doctors and nurses or otherwise are using proper protection, they get pretty slack after a while and have a sense of empowerment that because I'm a doctor or nurse, I can't get it. Forget that. If it's multi-drug resistant TB or chlamydia pneumoniae or some other weird infection that's got multi-drug resistance, you sure as heck can get it, especially if you're sloppy, and you shouldn't act that way. And our antipathogenics, by the way, will kill Ebola, which is Nutrimedical. It's not like any other iodine out there. Allicin Med, Alamax, Alamed, and our Silver 100, which is not like any other silver. It's the only ionic silver in the world. There's no competitor, period. No competitor. Don't make silver at home, for God's sake. This is hundreds to thousands of times stronger. It's in its lethal form. It's also the ionic form of silver is necessary for stem cell activation. So silver is a noble metal. It actually is one of the primary ways your body activates stem cells. So that's very important. The chikungunya virus is, of course, gaining traction in not only the southeast. It's come up from Central and South America in a matter of 6 months. It's now in Florida and in Georgia. The more you read these headlines from Drudge, and then we go to other sources for Yahoo News, Google News, etc., and read some of the other ones, like, it's hard to believe that things are really happening, but they are. And we have solutions for them. Firstly, the solutions come in God's name and with His wisdom. And secondly, we have to take action. Welcome back, and want to do a little more geopolitical analysis first. And in the first hour, if you see me get all excited, and it seems that I'm interrupting my guest or going on on a rant, it's important. In fact, before the hour, when I talked to Dr. Bob, he wasn't actually certain what to specifically talk about. And of course, that's my job as a host, to try to direct it based on the geopolitical news and the whole direction of the week of all the different programs. Starting with John Moore in the third hour on Monday, we want to focus on what's going on in Gaza, what's happening in America, why Russian troops on American soil. And again, this has happened over 35 plus years, where over multiple administrations we have foreign troops, Russian, Mongolian, Chinese, United Nations troops, training up to 1.2 to 1.4 million people at any one time on our weapons and tactics. That's crazy. Aircraft even from East Germany. Even during the Cold War, we're actually training here in Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico. So I think people should kind of realize that what they think is really happening, that's why we put up crazy video clips like Weird Al Yankovic yesterday, that the world that you think exists is all a fantasy in your own mind, or the mind created by the media that want you to believe it. They should be called the medium, because they're all like mediums trying to if you want to call it, to manipulate your mind into believing something that never was. And of course we have now Cruz whipping together against a Boehner border bill, and this is really interesting. Senator Ted Cruz, an influential Tea Party member, will meet with a group of House Republicans Wednesday to urge them to oppose House Speaker John Boehner's plan to stem the flow of migrant children at the U.S.-Mexico border, according to several House members who plan to attend. Cruz is huddled in the latest attempt to combat a freshman senator wading into House affairs and serving as an informal whip against the leadership immigration position. It's also a direct shot at Boehner's effort to pass this legislation hours before the bill is scheduled to come to the House on Thursday. On Friday, the House adjourns for a 5-week recess, leaving Boehner little time to cobble together the votes necessary to pass his proposal. There'll be sufficient support in the House, Boehner said, a Republican of Ohio, after a meeting of the House Republican Conference on Tuesday. He added, "We have a little more work to do." Now, we have to kind of look at some of the details of what they're trying to do. Boehner unveiled legislation on Tuesday to make it easier to deport Central American minors who've entered the United States illegally, provided $659 million to federal agencies through the end of the fiscal year, and change the 2008 anti-trafficking law. The funding will be significantly less than the $3.7 billion that President Obama has requested from Congress, and less than the $1.5 billion initially floated by Boehner and his allies earlier this month. Well, all of this stuff is basically inadequate and incompetent. Firstly, our immigration laws should work. They should be efficient. In fact, I'll just tell you this quick story. Harley Schlanger, several years ago, got married, and her lady was a Austrian lady. He's had to travel back and forth, actually, to Austria, specifically because his wife, who's applied years ago to become an American, continues to have delays caused by the American immigration system. Now, here we have an American who is married to a European wife who is having delays, and yet these teenagers under Obama are getting literally certificates to show up in court, and that's sufficient to get on a bus or get on a plane and just be bivouacked here in America. And some of these teenagers have MS-13 tattoos on them. Now, when we have humanitarian crisis, that's a different thing. People have refugees, but our laws in America basically say that the child should be accompanied by their parent. It just makes sense that if you have a refugee child, a 5-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old, the mother should be there. But in many cases, it's not. So something very weird is going on. When you go from 5,000 a year to 300,000 almost, 80% of them are not these unaccompanied minors. 80% of them are teenagers. Many of them have very questionable and clouded backgrounds, so we don't know exactly why they're here, although many of them are gang members, probably even to survive in their own home country, because if you don't belong to a gang, you're quickly killed by a gang. So it's a brutish kind of culture that we allow because, of course, and this isn't a statement made by the president of Guatemala, that in fact America is at fault because of our need for drugs as to why this situation exists. And also, of course, if we want to stop the drugs, we could use our special military operations to clean out the rat's nest of these drug cartels very quickly in Colombia and Central and South America, but we don't. So we create crisis, we live off the crisis, we profit from the crisis, and then we, of course, sell more military armaments or increase different departments of the government, which is what Boehner's going to do. Firstly, why are we in the process of deporting people? They shouldn't get across the border at all. And on the other hand, why are we telling the Mexican government through Mr. Obama that children can be allowed to get on a death train because it's dangerous to get on the train? And Mexicans have now sworn that they're going to make the train travel faster, so it's impossible to get on the train. It makes it even more dangerous. They can die of heat stroke. They can die of just falling off the train. They get literally under the train or on top of the train. This is craziness. If they're true refugees, send them an air-conditioned bus and feed them on their way for these little minors and their children. But find out what the problem is and maybe fix it at a source. Make sure they have proper housing. Make sure they have food. Make sure they have some subsistence living to live in their own community with their extended family rather than them being torn out of there or creating a crisis like the source we have from Tim Alexander that, in fact, we have CIA operatives that are killing native Guatemalan males so their wife and their children, either common law or really married, are fleeing from the scene of a slaughter. And, of course, why? Why are they doing all this? Well, of course, Obama wants to get his carte blanche immigration bill in. It's not really an immigration bill. The immigration bill would be one where it's efficient, it's less expensive, it's quick. So people like Hartley Schlanger's new wife, instead of waiting for years, would get in a matter of weeks or months. She could pass the immigration law test of what it is to be an American. If she has the language skills, if she has other reasons why because she's the wife of an American, what's the problem? My own youngest son, who was born in Canada, because I'm an American, literally back and forth, now he's 23, he just got his American citizenship a few weeks ago. It cost a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of documentation to do so. There's no need for that. And countries basically that set up laws and giant administrations like America, the solution isn't to pour more billions of dollars in, like $3.7 billion for Obama. How about streamline the system so it works? How about make sure nobody gets into the country that doesn't belong here? And if we have a true humanitarian aid, let them in. But don't create crises and don't think that, anybody anywhere can just kind of show up at our border and they get in the country. And, of course, that Obama earlier could have, and his functionaries of the Democratic Party, stopped a massive flood. Then people like the insane Nancy Pelosi showing up where all Americans come on down. That's not a reasonable attitude. We can't take all the poor and all the sick and all the weak in the world. The best thing to do is to help them in their own country so they don't have violence, starvation, and contribute to the violence by contributing to the drug trade. America could do a lot more to make people safe and happy in their own countries, which I'm sure they would be, than having to crawl across the Rio Grande River after taking the death train with their little youngsters, many of them dying on the way. This is unreasonable, and Obama should... I don't know how he can sleep at night when he does this. Welcome back, and we have Mr. Krauthammer making all kinds of interesting statements. I want to start switching gears back and doing some nutritional functional medicine, and I'm going to go over a couple of things here to give you an idea of the range of different companies we deal with. Of course, we have our Nutrimedical line. We have some additional products we carry like lumbrokinase, which is going to be far superior, by the way, along with nattokinase, to the Xarelto, Coumadin, all the other nasty toxic drugs doctors will try to give you if they think you have atrial fibrillation or a risk of stroke. And by the way, strokes happen to all kinds of people. We had a good friend recently who had a stroke. I tell people, if you've got any suspicion of a stroke-like activity, the first test you do is a rheologics test, which measures blood viscosity, and you can measure fibrinogen level, fibrin degradation products, increased oxidative stress markers such as C-reactive protein and PI1. Those are easy to reverse with diet and nutraceuticals and exercise like vibrational platform and infrared sauna. You don't need to go to toxic, dangerous drugs. We have, of course, the Alimax, Alimed, and Mount Red Velvet. We have very ecological formulas products with Jonathan Rothschild, elagic acid, which is from the terminal Chibulia, Posinol for mood improvement, selenium cruciferate, Johns Hopkins University, and uridine, mitochondrial catalyst, mitocarnitine, and synaptin for brain activation. We can use it in addition to the Cognition Plus. We add synaptin. We have, of course, the indiamese, which is the 14th, it's the most important mineral, if you want to call it. It is the chaperone, super chaperone for bringing minerals into your tissues and cells, and in fact, it's probably the most important one for lengthening your telomeres and actually extending lifespan, is indium. And I tell people, take 5 drops first thing in the morning and at bedtime and before, and you will dramatically extend lifespan. You'll increase intracellular mineral content of magnesium, chromium, vanadium, all the minerals necessary to activate all the important protective genes. We have Lumen Photon, of course, and which we talk about weekly. MagnaSoothe, which we're going to have an expert coming on Friday from the company, Tom Strader, and he'll be talking about MG12. We, of course, carry the Magna Smooth, which has got Arnica Montana. Great. I use it for my deep tissue massage every week. Magnesium oil. We got the Magna Charge, which has bicarbonate. You'll feel literally the tingle, the zap, as it touches you with the essential oils and the minerals from the Dead Sea. And, of course, I tell people the most important intracellular mineral for life is magnesium. Far more important than any other mineral. 10,000 to 100,000 magnesium ions for every calcium ion inside your cells. Any more important than potassium. And you can't get your potassium levels up. And, by the way, potassium is important, too. But you can't get your potassium up unless your intracellular minerals. So even the normals that are used at Genova labs aren't normal. We always have sales on for Silver 100, Nutriodine, and Alamed are major antipathogenics. And recently we did a little humanitarian package for a lady who had recent breast cancer and had her white count crash. And I gave her NutriDefense to help boost her immune system with our amazing formula I put together. Ageless, which is going to give immunoglobulins, lactoferrin, colostrum, and all the other new cofactors in our Ageless Vanilla, which is our new formulation, upgraded formula. We gave her, of course, the Vitamineral Max and Mountain Red Velvet to rebuild her bone marrow, and Silver 100, which will also help. And, of course, she's going to be taking Alamed to prevent any infections as her white count drops, to prevent yeast infections, fungal infections, bacterial in her bowel, sinuses, etc. So she'll make a good recovery, even though she unfortunately went through regular conventional chemotherapy and radiation, which can kind of not only zap your pancreas from producing enzymes, but also crash your bone marrow. We, of course, have Vibra Slim, which is a vibrational platform exercise that we have, which is modular. Very good price, tilt-type technology, excellent device. We have, of course, Michelle's website, which talks about all the neat things that she does, setting up, for example, the cruise coming up November 22nd to 29th. We have charitable donations for if you want to donate to help someone else be able to get nutraceuticals. We have donations. All our donations go to provide humanitarian aid for others, veterans, people that are impoverished, people that are desperate, and we have to be very careful to prey on who's going to receive that aid because it's limited in terms of where we get the charitable donations. Do we have enough to be able to help? Of course, we have when you sign up for the cruise coming up in November, you're going to be signing up for several things. Firstly, lectures. I'm going to have a few really good lectures. One dealing with functional medicine, wellness, and also a Christian perspective on current events. And we'll also be bringing the QRMA, possibly the 3D NLS, and demonstrating other technologies like Lumen. So I'll bring those devices so you can see what they are, and I'll give you more explanation of them. Pure water systems, we talk about that all the time. If you use our code NUTRIMED, N-U-T-R-I-MED, M-E-D, you're going to save 10%. This is the only system you want for a tackle box, for emergency base station, BEV 100 on your apartment or your RV, BEV 300 under your sink. Whole systems, there's nothing like it. And of course, we had Bruce on with about hyperbaric therapy with mild hyperbaric dives. These are amazing. If you have serious health problems, you need hyperbaric oxygen therapy. If you're doing prevention or maximum performance, if you're an athlete, I think 5 of the New York Giants 2 years ago that won the Super Bowl, they had the hyperbaric chambers from Bruce McKeeman. So it makes a big difference in terms of getting rid of lactic acidosis and healing. We, of course, still put up the first hour of our program on Ku-band satellite, so if you are in a remote area of North or South America and want to pick up at least the first hour by satellite, you can get a Ku-band satellite from Rick's Satellite. They're really inexpensive. There's no further fee to buy. They're about $168 and $12 install kits, and there's no monthly charges. You just pick up signal. You get also the feeds for all the major news sites. You get many other channels as well available, hundreds of channels worldwide, radio, etc. So you get all kinds of other access to other information. We have, of course, Soma Pulse, which is the pulse magnetic field. You're going to save 15% off if you use the code NUTM. 50% off, which is roughly $200 on the device if you go through our web link for Soma Pulse, which increases your stem cells 400%. So you can slap it on your hips or your low back. You can put it over the long bones. You'll increase stem cell activation. Instead of taking the drugs, which are really expensive, use stem cell somapulse activation. If you put it over tissues, you're going to regenerate them. If you put it over areas of pain, you're going to turn off the pain. It's quite amazing. I use both. I recommend both, the somapulse and the lumen photon. We have, of course, the Ready Store and PrepareWise Foods. Ready Store is also excellent for emergency equipment, medical and survival supplies. I think it's a top prepper store in America generally, but the best foods in terms of packaging is PrepareWise. Largest portions, Mylar bags, etc. So PrepareWise Foods, and of course our vibrational exercise. And we're always looking at developing and bringing in new sponsors that are going to help people prep their body physically. We also have our other website, clayandiron.com. I'm going to start posting news articles and other embedded research through lots of different articles will be posted over there. The book on Fukushima should be coming out shortly. It's a lot of work because it's going to be documented to the hilt with all kinds of contributions from Chris Harris, our nuclear expert, and others. Actual diagrams of the nuclear reactors at Fukushima Daiichi, specific engineering solutions that can be implemented to actually remediate the problem, personal protection, which we have in our radiation protection protocols. And if you don't believe you can actually monitor your radiation levels, we have labs that are affiliated with us, like the Environmental Health Center of Dallas, that can measure your heavy metals. We have labs like Genova Metametrics lab that can take your red cells and measure your heavy metals in your body to determine if you've got isotope toxicity. Like one of the comments from Dr. William Ray, that people were showing differences depending on which side of the Rocky Mountains they were for isotopes indicating exposure to Fukushima. So that's going to change. We have some bursts of radiation that crossed the Rocky Mountains and went to the Midwest, the very south Midwest, by the way. So that's real. And we want to look at different nutraceuticals. I tell people if you're starting to have chronic fatigue, the first thing we think of is chronic low-grade infection, nutrient deficiency, adrenal and thyroid. But think of them as two horses pulling the plow of the body, of the mitochondria of the cells. So when you start failing, you're saying low T for men, low thyroid, low testosterone, low adrenals. We need to correct that. I've got new research literature when I come back, all the way from our research foundation in Europe that makes our leptin metabolic, and I'm going to read that report right off to you and explain it. Welcome back, and in this segment I'm going to deal with some research on our leptin metabolic. It's a major breakthrough, and here's how the research goes. When I started research 34 years ago with Dr. Otto Hewen, the head of pathology at the University of Calgary, I went back because I had a basically equivalent of a PhD, didn't write the thesis, but finished the project at age 21 in 5 months on marine molecular biology. Was working on honors biochemistry, did my project afterward on isolating a Vibrio marinus bacteria that could break down marine polysaccharides, creating a polysaccharide isotope labeled, and then got a isolate of the Vibrio that could break it down by 10 million times more enzymatic activity. Creating, by the way, the most available food source on the planet for feed to animals, highest protein and mineral content, because it's basically could convert a pound of seaweed to edible food with high protein and mineral content within a week, using digesters and this enzyme. Now, what I did with biochemistry with Dr. Hewen, who's the head of pathology, is we researched and found that the state of Alberta, province of Alberta, had actually been ordered by the courts to actually find out if there were elevated insulin levels, if someone was an angel of death killing people, because a number of people would arrive in emergency departments in Edmonton, Calgary, and other places in the very large province of Alberta. Alberta is, I would say of equivalent, or pretty close to equivalent size of Texas. It's a really big territory. It covers all the way from the U.S.-Canada border all the way to the Northwest Territories and inside the Arctic Circle, very near Prudhoe Bay and the water exploration at the Liberty Rig, which is the largest oil exploration on the planet right now. So America is already on the edge, once we get rid of Obama, of being totally not only oil independent, but literally the largest supply of oil on the planet by a large margin. Now, what happened is Alberta had a lot of money. They had, at the time of the Heritage Trust Fund, $24 billion for research, including medical research, project development, infrastructure, etc., in the Heritage Trust Fund. So we had lots of money to do research. So when we were ordering these tests, we could do literally thousands of insulin glucose tolerance tests. We measured ACTH, T3, reverse T3, brought the test over from Germany. What we discovered is that we postulate there was another hormone that was opposing insulin, causing insulin resistance, because we found diabetics had averaged 3 to 5 times the normal level of insulin. And as I mentioned in this program before, When I presented this to the Ron Carey Research Institute at the University of Calgary, the head of the program, Dr. McEwen, freaked out and got so angry that he tried to see if he can get my license pulled for just doing the research and embarrassing them. Well, this is typical of knucklehead doctors. And believe me, there's still lots of knuckleheads around. The dinosaurs have not gone away. And we're talking about science. All we're doing is drawing bloods, didn't even do treatment. I had 2 master's level dietitians in my clinic, and I had a huge practice of 21,000 Mormons. Eventually, after a while, I lost a bunch, so we was down about 16,000 Mormons. That's a big practice. And a lot of them were white obese, a lot of diabetics, a lot of non-Mormons were also in the practice besides that 16,000, thousands more. And we were doing, before I started, they were Dr. Kent Remington, the owner of the practice, who was pretty high up level Mormon. His brother had married McKay's daughter, which is the Mormon prophet at the time, Prophet McKay, who was the head of the Mormon church at the time. And of course, I was not a Mormon, never have been a Mormon. Studied with them for a few months to find out what they're all about, but let me tell you, it's scary. We'll get into that another time. The issue is Mormons are very intelligent, very driven, very family-oriented, and they're really concerned about the fact that many of them were turning diabetic. And so they were getting HCG shots, human chorionic gonadotropin. So I thought, there's got to be an analogy. And I found out that there was an analogy between that and a hormone in the brain called proterolin. So I would administer the proterolin challenge test. Now, the important thing to understand is this product, which is leptin metabolic, is a glycosaminoglycan molecule complex, very unique, and has receptor effects on insulin and leptin receptors. Now, what happens is your fat tissues make what's called adipokines. These are inflammatory molecules that your fat tissues make, and if you measure the blood level of adipokines, they directly reduce insulin receptor number. So your insulin should be 2 to 12 microunits of insulin. If you actually test it at Genova Labs for fasting blood insulin, if your level of insulin is high and your receptor number of insulin is low, in your muscle tissues, you're going to get little tiny fat globules. If you do a scanning electron microscopy or high-resolution microscopy, you're going to see fat globules in the muscle if you do a muscle biopsy. You're also going to see, if you do a stained receptor number, you're going to see the receptor number is reduced. So to defeat diabetes and obesity, which are basically two sides of the same coin, because anybody who's obese or has a dyslipidemia, even if they're not obese, and their lipids are abnormal, they've got to call phase 1 diabetes with a dyslipidemia or obesity. They're basically, in a sense, phase 1, which means they got elevated insulin resistance with more than enough insulin. And, by the way, you can see this on the QRMA test. You'll see normal insulin output and glucagon, but you'll see elevated insulin resistance ratio. It shows right up on the QRMA test. You can prove it by doing fasting 2-hour PC blood sugar and insulin at Genova Metametrics lab, and they'll actually measure in a federally certified lab the actual levels, so we can postulate your level of receptor depression. So those receptor numbers you're going to change when you use things like take our dibetaline, biotin plus, but the most powerful to stimulate your increased receptor number is our leptin metabolic. And I tell people, initially you might need to take more. Instead of just taking one in the morning, you might need to take one twice a day or two twice a day until the receptor number starts to change. And what you'll notice is the white fat in your tissue. So I'm just going to read off some of the report I received from their research scientists in Europe that make our leptin metabolic. It's a unique product. We have the exclusive on it. And the leptin metabolic has demonstrated to reduce general adiposity to an increase in the oxidative metabolism of white adipose tissue. In other words, it makes your white adipose tissue burn fat. As a consequence of the reduction in general adiposity, we have shown that the level of expression of the leptin gene and consequently the level of expression of leptin is significantly reduced. In other words, if your body's making more leptin, leptin should stop your appetite, but if you get leptin resistance, it's not going to turn it off. So literally your fat cells try to generate leptin, tell you to stop eating because you're getting fat. But if you're leptin resistant, the appetite isn't turned off. So one of the side effects of taking leptin metabolic is you're going to do portion control. Your body's going to say, you had enough, do a push away now. Push your plate away, stop eating or drinking. Also, your number of insulin receptors are going to increase because you don't have this cytokines being generated. It's accompanied by a reduction in circulating levels of pro-inflammatory adipokines. It's been shown that leptin acts synergistically with other pro-inflammatory adipokines, promoting development of osteoarthritis by activating cellular inflammation and promoting oxidative stress. In other words, it's not just promoting obesity, it's generating osteoarthritis. So some people don't get overweight. They get this bad osteo, or they develop dyslipidemia and they end up with a stroke or heart attack, even if they're only 5 or 10 or 20 pounds overweight. So it doesn't just go down one pathway and make people fat. It can make you osteoarthritic, or when you get insulin resistance in your brain, we call it type 3 diabetes, you get dementia because your body can't metabolize sugar in your brain anymore because that's the primary fuel the brain uses. And in those people, we need to give MCT, medium-chain triglycerides, because they don't metabolize sugar very well anymore, so the brain cells stop making an action potential. That's why things like coconut oil is good, because it's MCT. In our clinical trial, they found that the reduction in leptin and pro-inflammatory adipokines strongly associated with improvements in osteoarthritis. So we use that along with joint performance and tendon mender, may add collagen max in our anti-inflammatory Inflamex, and we basically don't have people that have need for pain meds anymore, even after they've been suffering for years. We also find that if we increase oxidative energy using CoQ10 Supreme, which is the only non-crystallizing CoQ10, CoQ10 ubiquinol, and our various forms of carnitine, which is acetylcarnitine, D-ribose, and our new one now, IBS Care, which is the propionyl L-carnitine long-acting tablets. Fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, chronic viral syndromes, they just go away within a few days to a week. They just go away because it's all related to these pro-inflammatory molecules messing up your mitochondria and your energetics. In addition, the current evidence suggests that pro-inflammatory adipokines also link obesity to the development of systemic insulin resistance. Diabetes. I used to call it insulin receptor peptide, and I postulated this with Dr. Otto Hewen back 34 years ago when I was doing my research in diabetes. So now we have the solution, and we can actually measure your progress. If you're diabetic, if you contact me, I'll tell you what labs to do, the right tests to prove that you've overcome thyroid resistance, insulin resistance, leptin resistance, real tests that can show that our products, our nutraceuticals combined with vibrational exercise and diet, low glycemic index, George Cruz style diet, will reverse your hypertension, your obesity, your dyslipidemia, your osteoarthritis. We have the solution now. We have ways to prove it now with blood tests, believe it or not.